Well, hello and a very, very warm welcome. My name is Daisy McAndrew. I'm delighted to be hosting this webinar this afternoon. Obviously, the first thing I'd like to say is I do hope that everybody is okay. It's a really, really anxious time, of course, for not just anybody in our industry, but anybody in the world at the moment. So really delighted to have your company today. You can tell that I am not Nick Gold, I am Daisy McAndrew. Nick couldn't join us, so I will just explain that I have stepped in at the very last minute. So please do bear with me if my technological skills are not quite what they might be. We, of course, today are talking about resilience at a time of great insecurity, at a time of great anxiety for everybody. We've got three fantastic speakers who are going to be talking us through their experiences. And most importantly, I really want you to ask lots of questions. I will be keeping an eye on the questions as they come in, but do send your questions and do also tell me whether it's a specific person that you want to direct your question to, or whether it's just for all the panelists. I'm just going to check. I'm delighted. This is the second event that Speakers Corner have done this webinar, this virtual event, and I'm thrilled that we've had 500 people register. So thank you so much for taking the time. I also want to say a special thank you to Alex Mitchells, who's helped putting this together, and I think we owe him a great debt of gratitude. And we really want to make sure that by the end of this session, you have gone away with some practical tools, things that you can really help use you and guide you through the next few weeks and months as we all work out how to operate our private lives, our business lives in this extraordinary circumstance we all find ourselves in. We've got three fantastic speakers. I'll introduce them one by one when we come to hear from them, but they are Deborah, Farah Storr and Jason Fox. And as I said before, please, let's make this a two-way event, and I want to hear as many comments and questions from all of you out there. We're going to start off hearing from Deborah. Deborah has been part of and led expeditions, global expeditions all over the world. She's won medals at the World Championships. She's launched 5 different companies. She's a published author. She's presented, I'm told, more than 400 BBC TV shows. And of course, she's been awarded an MBE. If you could, I would ask you to give a very warm round of applause, but we'll do it virtually. Please welcome and listen now to Deborah Searle, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Daisy. So my name is Deborah Searle. I don't know if it's going to switch to my screen or not, Daisy. Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. Okay, so my name is Deborah Searle, and I once spent 3.5 months completely alone in a small wooden rowing boat, rowing across the Atlantic Ocean. So I guess I've taken social distancing to a bit of an extreme. Today, I'd like to share just a little bit of that story with a few images and videos. I suppose, just to paint a picture, not in any way to brag, although I am really proud I managed to do this alone, but more in the hope that it will really demonstrate how possible it is not just to survive, but thrive when we're faced with a challenging situation, and to share 2 of the tools that I relied on to stay mentally resilient in what was actually quite a horrendous situation that I absolutely never would have chosen. And so let me start by just sharing this short video.
Our latest sporting heroine is a woman who's rowed her way across the Atlantic, has been talking to the 6 o'clock news about her remarkable but terrifying adventure.
It's taken Deborah 3.5 months to row from Tenerife to Barbados. She started her journey with her husband, but continued on her own when he pulled out after only 2 weeks.
She continued alone.
So obviously the plan wasn't to spend 3.5 months in isolation. We'd entered a 3,300 mile Atlantic rowing race, and the only difference between our boat and all these others you can see here is that we were the only mixed sex team taking part. They were all double-handed men's teams, but I was convinced I'd picked quite a good partner in Andrew, and that he's 6'5", he'd rowed for Great Britain, which seemed particularly important to offset the fact that I'd never even rowed before. But after 4 years of planning and building this boat, which arrived in a box looking like an IKEA wardrobe, we set off on what we hoped would be the adventure of a lifetime. Unfortunately, on the first night out there, we discovered that Andrew suffers from what's like a really crippling phobia of open ocean, which obviously is a pretty unfortunate time to discover this. At first, I guess we'd been really convinced that we would find a solution. But after about a week, he'd started slipping in and out of consciousness because he was having a lot of panic attacks that were preventing him from eating and sleeping. And so I knew the only option was to get a rescue boat to come out to help us. But that left me with this massive decision. You know, do I get onto this rescue boat and go home with him, or do I stay out here on my own and try and finish it for both of us? But the reality was I was absolutely loving it out there. So I chose to go on alone and started what ended up being a very long, slow journey across the Atlantic Ocean. Alone, I guess I'd never really anticipated how long I would be alone. With Andrew on board, it was supposed to take us 6 weeks, but it ended up taking me 3.5 months. And my living spaces were literally this coffin-shaped cabin that wasn't even tall enough to sit up in. And the conditions were tough. You know, I had 2 hurricanes while I was out there. So I was facing some days what they looked like apartment-sized waves racing towards you. And then I had this constant threat that I felt all the time of the marine life. I was convinced that they were going to come munching through the side of the boat and eat me, because that's what they do in the movies, isn't it? Which is pretty much what I based my knowledge on at that time. So how did I stay resilient? Well, I had a whole mindset toolkit that I relied on. It became a really significant part of my journey, and it's still a really significant part of my journey now as I try and grow my businesses, and, you know, at the moment juggling trying to homeschool my kids as well. And I haven't got time to share them all with you, but I'd love to share 2 with you today that for me became crucial and are still really crucial now. And in general, they came about out of near disaster. Often they were things that came out of desperation because I wanted to live. And so this first one actually came about when I'd nearly been run over by a big container ship, because it turns out they don't look out for a woman in a rowing boat. And I called my twin sister up just after it passed me by. I had a satellite phone on board and I was absolutely terrified. And it just struck me that I couldn't do this alone. Like, if Andrew had been on board, one of us would have been on watch while the other one slept. And so I rang her up hysterically. And I remember her saying to me, you know, Deborah, you've just got to choose your attitude about this. And I remember thinking at the time, if you were here now, I would punch you so hard. But sorry, let me just move this. But I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said, these 3 words, choose your attitude. And I guess the reason that choose your attitude stuck was because nothing else out there I actually felt I had a choice about. I couldn't choose whether I got attacked by a shark or run over by a ship or blown backwards 30 miles after I'd just spent 3 days rowing that amount of miles. But I could always choose the attitude with which I bounced back from it. And so I ended up kind of clinging on to that as a hope. And I ended up writing it on the cabin hatch, on those blue arrows. You can just see it says choose your attitude, because that was what I faced as I rowed every day. Every oar stroke, that's what I read. And I'd sit by it at breakfast time, and I turned it into a little kind of mindset tool, an exercise where I'd ask myself, right, come on, Deborah, choose your attitude. Which one is it going to be today? Although it'd have to be a positive one, because negative ones were kind of banned from the boat. And so, you know, it wasn't always positive per se. Sometimes it was something like patience or enthusiastic, but it had to be positive in nature. And then the next thing I'd do is I'd make myself list out loud, well, what would be the benefits if you stuck to it? And I think, well, I guess if I was being enthusiastic, I might pull harder, and then I'll do more miles than I've done on any other day. And generally by the end of breakfast, I feel pretty enthusiastic, or whatever the one was I picked. And I've had to carry on doing that because ultimately we have a choice, don't we? We have a choice in this lockdown, how we respond to the situation we find ourselves in. And that's particularly important when we feel completely out of control, which I think is a natural inclination to feel that at this current time. But there's also a lot of evidence that not only choosing the right attitude is crucial for our health and happiness, it has a massive impact on job success. When they researched people who'd had great job success and tried to drill down into what is it that's made them successful, amazingly, they found that only 25% of it could be attributed to their skill set, but a massive 75% of it was down to their attitude. And so what does that look like in practice? Well, for me, it's doing that choose your attitude exercise every morning. I've got a journal, I write it in every single day. I've even got choose your attitude engraved on my water bottle so that every single sip, it's always on my desk, so that I'm always drinking and then reminding myself, this is the thing that I've got control of. I get to choose how I respond to what's happening today and the challenges I'm facing. The other really big part of my journey out there was finding a whole load of attitude boosters, these positivity boosters, I like to call them, because the reality was it was a pretty dire situation to find myself in. And it's really hard not to make these kind of catastrophic fantasies. Do you ever do that where, like, I would catch myself looking down at the black water when it's totally pitch black and the moon's not up in its cycle? I couldn't help but keep looking at the water and thinking, there's like 2 kilometers of dark water below me now, and the nearest help is 2 weeks away. And in those moments, I convinced myself something was about to come out of the dark water and eat me. And I caught myself at times doing the same about coronavirus. You know, will my aging in-laws catch it? You know, will I be able to deliver on this client project? Now I can't even get to client site, and I've got the kids to try and entertain at the same time. These catastrophic fantasies are the detriment of choosing their attitude. They're the thing that bring us down in our mindset, and then that becomes a spiraling mindset that actually is completely unproductive. And so for me, it's about establishing positivity boosters that become habitual. They're so part of my daily routine that they're just what I do, just like brushing my teeth. And so a lot of them I had to naturally do at sea anyway. But if we look at what the science tells us around how do we boost our levels of positivity, and it's crucial to do that, because what the science shows us now, what neuroscience studies have shown us, is that our brains at positive outperform our brains at negative, neutral, or stressed. And on every single metric, they enhance our ability to succeed. Things like our intelligence, our ability to focus on a project for longer, our ability to have more enthusiasm, our ability to be healthier because it reduces our stress levels and therefore has less of an impact on our body. And so having a positive attitude is not a nice to have. In my mind, this is business critical. And so these are all the ways that have been found to help. Having a gratitude practice, that's one of the things in my Choose Your Attitude journal. Just writing 3 things down a day, small things that you're positive, that have happened in the last 24 hours that you're happy, that have made you feel positive. Because then it's like installing an app in your brain that spends the rest of the day scanning the world, trying to see the positives so that you've got something to write the next day. Using mindfulness, the Headspace app, just doing 10 minutes meditation a day, I found brilliant. Without doubt, exercise for me is the biggie. That makes all the difference. At sea, music was huge for me. Putting on songs that were attached to a memory so that you're instantly transported back to that kind of happy moment. Getting more sleep, journaling, acts of kindness. And of course, we've seen that even watching acts of kindness on TV at the moment that people are doing makes us feel more positive, doesn't it? Consciously choosing a positive attitude, walking in nature. And of course, I was surrounded by the most incredible nature at sea. And even humorous videos, showing a humorous video to your team at the start of a team meeting has been found to boost the positivity of a whole team. And so scientifically, we know that there are a number of things we can do, and inherently we know these things are good, don't we? We probably have all tried one or many of them a number of times. The challenge, therefore, is how do we make them stick? And I think that habitualizing is the key to this. It's really where the focus needs to be. For me, habit stacking has been what has allowed me to get a lot of these put into place on a regular basis. And habit stacking is, if you think about it, we've all got a number of habits that are actually very well ingrained. We all probably brush our teeth twice a day. We probably are, habitually make a cup of coffee in the morning, or we open our emails in the morning. We have habits that are very established. When we stack a habit that we want to embed on top of one that's already established, it's much more likely to stick. And so for me, putting my gym kit by my bed after I brush my teeth every evening, so that when I step out of bed in the morning, it means I've got to stand on my kit. That has exponentially meant that I'm more likely to get up and exercise before the kids get up in the morning. And I need to do that. For me, that's absolutely crucial, because it has the biggest impact on my levels of energy and my positivity. And I manage a team of people, and that's really important to me, that I show up in front of them with the right mindset. I was reading this research study by Gallup, and they found that this is true, that happier leaders at work earn more respect, and people are more motivated to follow their vision. I need people to follow my vision now more than ever, I think, during this time. And so, like choosing my attitude each day, finding these positivity boosters that become habit is business critical. And so as you continue your time on lockdown, my hope is that you will find the ways that work for you. And maybe one of those two might be something that you can make stick. Either choosing your attitude each morning and doing it as a routine, having a trigger that reminds you to do it, whether that's a journal or doing it when you're looking in the mirror, when you're brushing your teeth in the morning. And then finding the positivity boosters and habit stacking, something that reminds you to do it every day so that it sticks. Back to you, Daisy.
Thank you so much. Now let me get my video to work. Deborah, I'm sure that many people will have found in that short amount of time, lots of things. Certainly I was writing notes thinking, all right, I'm going to really do this. Just a reminder to everybody out there, if you have questions for Deborah, do use the Q&A section, the icon at the bottom, to send those questions through, or for any of our panelists this afternoon, if you have any questions. See, she's not drinking from her bottle that's got choose your attitude on it. Very naughty. But anything at all, do send them through. Send me questions down on the Q&A. Deborah, thank you so much. I am going to turn off your video now, and we're going to go to Farah, who I'm going to turn video on for. I'm sure, as many of you know, Farah Storr is editor-in-chief of Elle UK. She's formerly of Women's Health and Cosmo. She's the author of The Discomfort Zone. She's done 2 TED Talks, one on authentic leadership. We've already heard from Deborah about how much leadership matters, particularly in these moments of crisis. We're all looking, aren't we, for somebody to show us how to be, what to do, how to behave. So Farah's written extensively about authentic leadership, and she's also done a talk about the power of discomfort, which again couldn't be more appropriate, could it? We are all feeling extreme levels of discomfort at the moment. Farah, thank you so much for talking to us today. Obviously, over the next few minutes, you and I are just going to have a chat through some of your experiences in this area. But I just want to start off by asking you about this issue about transforming, and how obviously where we are at the moment is such a critical moment. But do you see what's going on at the moment as potentially leading to some sort of societal reform, change in society?
Well, I mean, look, it's a big question, but I think one of the things that and actually it's the reason that I wrote the book, one of the things over the last kind of 6 and 7 years that I was worried about was actually, I thought the wrong narrative was being told to people. And by people, I mean generally younger generations, so younger than me, people in their kind of teens and 20s. The narrative seemed to be, and we've seen this across culture, which was everything that you're afraid of, you don't have to expose yourself to it. You can coddle yourself away. You know, there's this phrase now in society, which is you can hack the system. And hacking the system, of course, means you don't have to confront the obstacle in front of you. You can avoid it. And actually, that's a really good thing. And of course, I never thought that actually that was the right thing to do. So a couple of years ago, when you started to see this behavior across culture, so for example, you know, we've seen started in our university campuses where there was the introduction first in the US and now in the UK of these safe spaces where, you know, students can retreat to if they feel that they are being attacked in any way. We've seen it in non-platforming at student campuses as well, where, you know, if there are people with differing opinions, you don't have to hear that, you know, trigger warnings. So all these things were happening in society, and the narrative which was given to people was, this is the way forward. You can protect yourself from the things that you are most frightened of. And my feeling was, actually, that's absolutely not true of humankind and human life. And that actually, and we know this, human beings are meant to carry a load. You know, we actually perform incredibly well under pressure. We are made for discomfort. I mean, you know, thousands of years ago, we had to fight for survival. And so what I suppose I hope will happen as a result is that people will start to change the narrative, because I think what's happening now in society is this is something that you can't coddle yourself away from. I mean, it's a global pandemic. There is no way someone can say, well, you can hack this problem, or you can hide yourself away from it. You really can't. And so what I suppose I hope will happen is that people will start to understand, and they're going to need leaders to help them understand this, which is when the kind of, you know, that terrible cliche, but they're cliches for a reason. When the going gets tough, actually, it is what we are made for. And actually we behave incredibly well under it.
And it's interesting though there what you were saying about we can't you know, hide away from this, we can't cuddle ourselves away from it, but in some ways that's exactly what we're being told to do, because we're being told to self-isolate. But of course, if we're talking about business rather than personal, having to do that, having to isolate yourself as well as continuing to make money or be a business person, or find a new way to behave, or find a new way to to survive in this world. So we are all going to have to adapt to this new world whilst being isolated. It's this extraordinary dichotomy, an irony almost.
But I think what we're seeing is the beautiful thing about this is actually you can expose yourself. I mean, you know, I probably spend, ironically, more time with my team. And the interesting thing, what's happening through Zoom, I was talking about this with someone the other day, is people show their vulnerabilities, interestingly. A lot of people have a face on in a kind of corporate environment. You don't really see what's going on. And where you are talking to people through a screen when they are in their own homes, like, you know, I can see you with your dogs, and you see a kind of real vulnerability in people. And actually, as a leader, that is something that you crave. You want to see the real person behind the mask. And so actually it's a very interesting opportunity for leaders now to really understand the workforce that they have, if they lead into it, I suppose. And I think, you know, the other thing to probably say now is, you're right, interestingly, physically, we are coddled away. But I think that's why you have to, as a leader, have regular exposure to what's going on in your business, because it would be very easy to either sit there and kind of, you know, block the world out. Or the alternative is, because what is happening is so huge, it's so momentous, you can feel hugely overwhelmed. And I think that's one of the things that I've always felt about challenging situations is, you know, the narrative we tell ourselves is, well, it's too scary, it's too big a problem, I just can't deal with it. And what that is that's a way of actually not dealing with it at all. But the truth I've always found about any situation that you're frightened of or that you're scared of, the real truth is nothing is impossible, or nothing is challenging or difficult from beginning to end. You know, that's just what we tell ourselves. You break something down within any situation, and even now, you know, we're not going to battle Corona from our lounge, but you break it down into what are the things that you are really, really frightened of. And it's probably, you know, my family. Am I going to have a job at the end of this? How am I going to get my job done? That may be your day-to-day thing. Break it down into the real moments of discomfort within this huge, challenging situation. And once you break it down, then you come up with a plan. And it's a very simple, very similar to Deborah, it's a very simple 3-point plan of understanding how you get through those brief moments of discomfort. And once you do that, the beautiful thing is you feel in control. And, you know, ultimately, the illusion of control is far better than feeling, look, everything is out of control, I don't know what I'm doing, because that's the moment, of course, you become completely overwhelmed and everything shuts down.
I just want to go back to, you said come up with a 3-point plan.
Yes.
How do you do that, and what would the points be, or are they different for everybody?
They will be absolutely different for everybody. So, I mean, look, an example I always give is, you know, a lot of people we know are really scared about, let's say, public speaking. And the reality is public speaking is not terrifying from beginning to end. The whole experience is not terrifying. But you have to ask yourself, well, what is it within that experience that actually I really am frightened of? And you break it down into 3 things. So for me, before I started public speaking, it was the moment that you first get on stage and you have to get everybody's attention very, very quickly. And they're talking and it's very difficult. So I was like, okay, that's what I'm really finding uncomfortable. So what is the plan that I can come up with? And the plan that I personally came up with, and you're right, it's totally different for everybody. But what I came up with from watching lots of speakers was actually, if you turn and if you ask a question to your audience, suddenly they go silent. Suddenly you have a captive audience because they're thinking about themselves. You know, you have to think about, break it down into 3 things. Any more than that, I actually think you start to forget. It's unmanageable. And then work out, okay, what's going to get me through this? Just 3 very simple things. What's going to get me from A to B? And you know, at the moment, I think rather than people going, oh my God, Corona, what's going to happen? Break it down. You know, what are you scared about today? It might be like Deborah was saying, how am I going to get to my clients on time? How am I going to get this piece of work through? But you come up with a plan. And the minute you start feeling in control is the minute actually that you can kind of set sail and get it done.
I want to ask you about, you mentioned leadership, and you also mentioned about, you know, the fact that we're all in our homes now and we're kind of showing another side to ourselves. And you mentioned Huey and Sparky, who I probably should have introduced to everybody. I'm sure more people are looking at them than are looking at me. But it's interesting in this new world that we're living in now, where we are, in effect, showing our soft underbelly to people that we probably would normally give, you know, a more of an armour, you know, sort of, you know, to sort of more formal front to. But when it comes to leadership, how do you manage those 2 bits? Because you don't, if you're a leader, you don't want to show your team that you're falling apart. You don't want to show them that you're crying in the shower in the morning, which I'm sure many of us are doing. And yet you don't want to pretend that things aren't bad, because they are.
That's right. And so you have to be, and it's a terrible cliche now, but you have to be authentic. And actually, what I tend to do with my team is, well, you have to be honest, because actually I don't think now people go, well, you need strong leadership. Depends what strong leadership is to you. Strong leadership for me has never been about a leader going, you know, leading by dominance, going, I have a plan and it's all sorted. Because the truth is, if I had a leader right now going, we have a plan, this is exactly how it's going to work, do not worry, I'd be really cynical. And so actually, I think there's 2 things. One, you do have to have a plan, but nobody at the moment is going to have this big all-encompassing plan, you know, and that would be foolish to your team to say you have all the answers. But I think what I do is you take it, again, you break it down, you do it day by day. You know, you have to figure out this week, what's the thing that's on everyone's mind? Well, as a leader, you go, guys, here's the plan. I don't know what's going to happen next week, but we're going to take it 1 week at a time, and I'm going to give you the answers that I have. So you have to show a bit of vulnerability. You have to have a plan. But I think anybody who goes in thinking they have the plan, I personally think your workforce, they're going to see. And you know, I think the best you want is, you do want a bit of vulnerability from your leader. You don't want them crying in the shower, no. But you do want them to go, look, I'm going to take it 1 step at a time, and I'm going to lead you, and I'm going to lead from the front, and let's just see how it goes.
Yeah. And talk us, I know that you went obviously from this stellar career in print to going to online, which is what a lot of people are in effect being forced to do at the moment, you know, being forced to go from, you know, a bricks and mortar business to an online business because of the situation we find ourselves in. What tips have you got, or how did you find that transition?
I mean, look, it was very hard, as it's hard for lots of journalists who, I've been a journalist for 22 years, a print editor for 10 of those. I still do the print product as well as the digital, as well as online. But it's scary if you have been a journalist and what you know is you spend weeks on a story, you delve into it. You have time to check the facts, to do a different angle, and then suddenly what you are having to do is produce stories minute by minute. You know, you are competing with everybody. You're not competing with other magazines now. You're competing with shopping channels. You're competing with the news. It's you. The narrative you can tell yourself is, and a lot of journalists, believe me, have done it over the years, is, I can't do this, you know, my career's come to an end. But of course, again, when you break it down what you're scared of, and you know, with digital, I suppose my fears were, I had a team who, and I still have a team who are brilliant, but I had a team who were like, well, suddenly we've gone from having 3 weeks to write a story to suddenly we have to write one overnight, and we want the quality to be the same, and we still want to come up with a new angle that nobody else will, but we don't have the time. what you have to do is you just have to break it down with them. And what we've done is we've just come up with a different way of telling our stories now. I mean, a prime example is last week, our print product had gone to press. I mean, we worked 3 months in advance. And so we were very aware that the print product, which was going to be on sale, would feel out of date. It wasn't acknowledging what was going on, still a good product. And so actually last week, the brilliance that happened was I had a team and I said, look, we now have to put our digital heads on and go, okay, what's the story we can tell? And we did something, I have to say, far more creative than perhaps we would have done if we were just kind of plodding along and this hadn't have happened. And we took, we asked other women to nominate women who were working on the front line. So not NHS actually, but supermarket workers, delivery drivers, funeral directors. We asked other women to nominate those women. We chose 7 women and we photographed them. And we were like, well, how are we going to photograph them? And so we spoke to this fashion photographer and she said, look, let's give it a try. I'm going to photograph them through Zoom. I'm going to put a black sheet over my computer and I'm going to take their picture. And I think ordinarily, if we'd have had time, we would have gone, that's crazy. A fashion magazine should not be doing that. It should not be taking pictures through a computer screen. And actually what we ended up with last week was we had these series of quite astonishing, hugely creative images, which were in a way a kind of sign of their time because they were shot through this this platform, which has become a lifeline for everyone. So what I would say is what's come out of this huge discomfort is real creativity. And I think for Elle, you know, I think a lot of people can see fashion magazines as, some people see them as superior. I think actually what those covers did that we released last week is there was a real intimacy and it showed a different side to what a fashion magazine can be. So huge flights of creativity can really come out of these kind of crunch moments.
I'm running out of time, Farah, but I do want to ask you, which is a sort of natural lead on from that, because of course most of the audience we're talking to today work in and around the events industry, and of course they're being forced to go from live human to human interaction events to something more virtual like we're doing today, which is similar from going to print to online. But of course we've been talking for so many years about how, because so much of our lives are taken up with virtual reality and online, that's one of the reasons we all love real interaction and live events, because it's an antidote to that. Now, of course, that has been taken away from us and we're not allowed to do those events. So with your experience, you know, what would you say about how you can, and again, I guess slightly talking about that intimacy that you were talking about just now, but you know, how can we best manage this new world?
You mean if you're working in an events capacity?
Yeah.
I think if you're working in events capacity, you're absolutely right. It's like print and digital. And first of all, you can't compare the two. They are completely different things. There will always be a place when everything rolls around, there will still be a place for live events. But there's also a very special place for digital, and there's a very special place for what's happening now. And I would say, you know, if events are your thing, this is a real opportunity. People get something quite different when they're talking one-on-one through a computer screen. And actually your performers, say if you are doing an event where you're relying on speakers or performers, you actually get something quite remarkably different from your speakers as well. Because, you know, a lot of speakers, what people don't realize is they get nervous. They put on a face when they're on a stage. They behave quite differently to how they behave when they're in their own homes. And so actually, I think it could be a real boon here. I think actually what you will get is a very, very different, you can tell the same story, but you can affect people and tell the story in a very different way. So they are not the same, they are different, but they are both equally brilliant.
Yeah, it's going to be such an interesting thing to watch, isn't it? How we do all behave differently. I mean, even that thing of, I find these Zoom meetings are so exhausting. They're more tiring than a real life meeting for some way. And all these things that we're having to work out. And of course, we're all exhausted at the end of the day, partly from emotion and anxiety. Farah, I can see that the questions are coming in. Thank you so much. And I'm going to keep an eye on those questions, but do keep them coming. If anything that we've touched on with Farah just now, her experiences of online or editorial leadership, whatever it might be, send your questions in. Farah, I'm going to mute you now. It feels so rude when I mute people, and I'm going to unmute Jason, who is our final speaker. Get his video up. Our final speaker before I open things up to Q&A. Jason Fox, Royal Marine Commander, of course, star of SAS, Who Dares Wins, totally different background, but I suspect some similar messages. Jason, you were trained to deal with frightening situations, and we all now find ourselves in a very frightening situation, and we don't know how we're going to get out the other end. But I just wonder what tips you've picked up along the way that might be useful to all of us.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me on the on the webinar. But for me, I suppose when I got asked to come and talk to you all about resilience and sort of like going into an unknown crisis situation, which is something I've done quite a bit of in the past, in my past career, I figured the best way for me to start was give you a little bit of an insight, tell you a story really quickly about a situation that I was involved in. It's a little bit gritty, but essentially I'm going to take you back to early September 2009. I'm sat in the back of a military helicopter, a Chinook helicopter, and I'm in the middle of a half-an-hour flight into an operation as a special forces operator. I'm wearing a helmet, I've got all my body armor on, weapons, and I've got night vision goggles on, which actually give you an element of distance and sort of, you know, it makes everything look very much unreal. It looks like a computer game. Everything's in a green haze and everything's sort of, I don't know, it looks like a video game. And I'm sat on that helicopter wondering what this night has in store for me. And you know, how did I get to be sat on that helicopter? Well, on the 31st of August, so just over a week before that, I was a member of a Special Forces squadron flying into the theatre of operations for a 6-month tour, and a 6-month tour, I suppose, can be likened to lockdown. You know, you're secured in one area, you're not allowed to speak to anyone other than the group that you live with. And then every now and again, when you do go out, you get shot at normally. So it's a very unnerving environment to be in, albeit that one that you have trained for and one that you choose to be in because that's your career. Anyway, fast forward again back to that helicopter journey. I'm there. I get given the 10-minute call, which means we've got 10 minutes before we land into what is essentially the unknown. I take my iPod off. I'm listening to music because that's a way of sort of like calming your nerves just prior to going into an operation. I put them away and I start concentrating on what it is I actually need to do as soon as we land. I start checking my kit. I then get the 6-minute call. Now, this is from one of the crew members in the helicopter. And literally, as he says that, I look out of the back of the Chinook helicopter where the ramp is down. And in that green haze, I can see, I'm in the second helicopter. I can see the third behind me floating in that green haze through the sky. And as he shouts out 6 minutes, the sky just erupts in what can only be described as the worst fireworks display I've ever witnessed in my life. You could see heavy machine gun fire coming towards us. I could see it, what I thought was hitting the helicopter behind us. You could feel the kinetic energy from rocket propelled grenades exploding next to our helicopter. It was almost shifting it through the sky. And it was petrifying. And I can remember feeling petrified. And this was, you know, this is a later tour for me. I'm supposed to be what is known as a combat veteran. And there I am feeling the fear on another level. And it was during that time that I was that petrified. I was holding onto my knees, squeezing them that tightly that I had to consciously tell myself to let go, which is what I did. The pain didn't actually go away. And what happened in the confusion was I was actually holding onto my mate's knee. He had hold of mine and we had like a little embarrassing moment mid-flight. Joking aside though, that is essentially what happened. But that went on now for 6 minutes. We're getting shot at for 6 minutes, and for the first minute, yes, I was petrified, but then the human psyche has to survive that. I'm not going to change that situation for me, but what I can control is my feeling. And without even thinking about it, I just went into survival mode and I just normalized what was happening. Essentially, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, get me off this helicopter because I want to have some form of control over my fate. But at that moment in time, I couldn't control things. Anyway, the journey continued. 6 minutes became 3 minutes, became a minute. We got given the 30-second call. We all stand up in the helicopter and we get ready to disembark. 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds, the helicopter lands, and the brief was to run out, turn right, and basically engage the enemy and try to achieve our mission, which is what we did. Now, my actual objective was a group of buildings that were about 100 meters from my location. As I left the helicopter, I was with a group of other guys, and that 100 meters was broken down into what was essentially 50 meters of ploughed field, or what I thought was a ploughed field. Then there was a ditch with a hedgerow, and then there was another 50 meters of waste ground before the cluster of buildings, which was our objective. To make a funny noise, and although we had been given a mission, which is all that really mattered that night, in the back of my mind, that was where it was parked. I was then starting to break that night down into bite-sized chunks, and my first bite-sized chunk was to get into that ditch and have a moment, have a reset, take stock of the situation, think about what I needed to do, and then continue on. It was about 20 meters from that ditch. My legs are burning, my lungs are burning, and all I want to do is get into that ditch. That comes over the radio system, so we're all plumbed into a radio system where we can talk to each other. It comes over the radio that's one friendly force, KIA, which essentially means one of our own team members, not in my team, but in another team, in another helicopter, had been killed. Now, I was overcome with emotion again. I wanted to know who it was. That wasn't important. All I needed to know as a member of the unit that was on the ground was that one of the teams that were with us was restricting its ability to maneuver. However, I got into that ditch, I rolled onto my back, I'm in the middle of a gunfight, and I start to check myself over and give myself that little reset. And it was at that moment that, again, I was overcome with an emotion. Now, it was obviously fear, but it was the first time that it ever manifested itself in the way that it just had, which was essentially I wanted to be back home as a 10-year-old boy with my mum sat on the sofa. Now, that rocked me for essentially a second, and I needed to do something to kick myself out of that sort of mental situation, the emotion. And what I did was just take stock of how I was feeling, and I took on board the fact that I was scared, and then I used that to sort of focus me on what was going on around me. I did have a second word. Right, you're a member of a special forces squadron, you're well trained, you know what you're doing, you've done this before, you've been in these situations before, have some confidence in who you are and your ability. But I also looked down the line of that ditch that I was in, and I saw the other guys that were with me, my teammates, and I actually, in that moment, took more strength from them, because I took strength from the fact that they're highly trained, highly motivated, they're people that I love, and I have a responsibility to them as they do to me. And it was at that point that we all stood up and kicked through the hedgerow. We continued on with that night. Now, that night was an emotional roller coaster for me. And there were many moments within that night where I wasn't too sure whether we were going to make it out of there. But we did. That was the tour. That tour was pretty much as was. That was how it went on for the rest of that 6 months. It was the operational tempo was extremely high. We picked up quite a lot of casualties with regard to the size of unit we were. We were essentially only 30 guys, and we picked up 25% casualty rate. And it was, every night was the unknown. You're flying or walking into the unknown. And it was after that tour that I came back, and I started to think about, I had a little bit of a wobble when I came back off that tour, but because of that, I started to look at why and how people like myself and the people around me get through those, and it became an interest for me. And in so looking at that, I started to realize the obvious things were obviously skills. We as a military unit, we have the luxury of training all the time. Our learning and development is all the time, so we're constantly building up our skill set, we're constantly learning, we're constantly cementing muscle memory and mindset into what it is that we learn. But that isn't enough. And I started to look back further as to how I became that resilient individual that could overcome those emotions. And I think a lot of it boils down to culture, and the culture that is bred into the military. Now, I joined the Royal Marines as a 16-year-old teenager. And I did not know how to be a soldier then, and they knew that. But what they do right from the very beginning as a Royal Marines commander is they start to sort of change your mindset, and they try to focus you on to how you need to think and how you need to operate as an individual within that environment. And there's 4 pillars, actually. They call it the Commando Spirit, but it's made up of 4 pillars. One is courage, one is determination, one is unselfishness, and the last one, the 4th one, is cheerfulness in the face of adversity. Now, to break those down, courage doesn't mean they expect you to be brave and sort of storm machine gun nests on your own. What it is they expect you to have the courage to face challenges and to be able to want to accept that there are challenges in life, and you need to head them on, and you need to take that leap of faith when entering into a challenge. And I believe that is what they mean by courage. Determination is to have that stubborn mindset to come in when you're in the middle of a crisis, and to continually think back to what it is that you've learned and continually push on to try and achieve your aim whilst in those crisis situations. Selfish about the people around you, and to breed unselfishness, you have to teach people that the people around them are important to them for them to survive. And that if you look after them, they in turn will look after you. And I think that's something that people can take away in the environment we're in at the moment. We hear about, people rushing to the shops and bulk buying, where as if people were unselfish, you'd be able to support the communities around you a lot better. Then you've got cheerfulness in the face of adversity. Now, this is one that I sort of focus on the most, and I feel it is extremely important. You need to find humor in extremely dark situations, and it comes down to having that positive mindset that Deborah was talking about earlier. Positivity is the key to getting yourself out of some really, really sticky situations. It gives you the strength of mind and character to push through and find a way out of a situation that is uncomfortable. Now, that all in line with itself does also lead me on to talk a little bit about something that Farah was talking about, which is the plan, the brief, the deliver, and the debrief. That is essentially how we break things down in the military, although the terminology is slightly different. You come up with a plan, you look at what the plan looks like. What you do in that plan is you look at lots of different courses of actions that might happen, or things that could happen, worst case and best case. Worst case and best case, yes. Then what you do is you brief that out. We call it a set of orders. In that brief is a phase known as the mission, and it is delivered twice. It's delivered twice for a reason, because essentially, no matter what happens in that plan, which never really goes according to plan, the mission is all that matters. You need to constantly have that in the back of your mind and sort of work around it, and always default back to what is it that we're trying to achieve. Once those orders are given, you go out and you deliver, or we used to call it execute, and you go and get the job done. But you enter into that delivery, into that execution phase with an extremely flexible mindset. You've got your procedures in place. You have your standard operating procedures that you never really deviate from, but you are allowed a flexible mindset. And then the biggest key to a lot of all of the stuff that you do in the military is the debrief. No matter whether things go well and according to plan, or badly and completely off track, you always go into a debrief where you can look at how you could do things better. Even if it was a successful mission, you still do a debrief and look at how you can do things better, because I'm telling you now, there is always something that has gone slightly wrong and could have made things slightly more smooth. So with that in mind, and pull that all together, that is what I believe builds resilience. It can be taught. It also comes down to experience as well, but it definitely can come with experience. But for me, the biggest thing is all about emotional awareness. And what I mean by that is, when you go into these situations, whether it's an everyday situation where you wake up on a Monday and you feel a little bit down, and you don't really pay it the respect it deserves, and you just crack on with the rest of the day, or whether you're in the ditch and you're wanting to be at home with your mum as a 10-year-old boy, Emotional awareness is the key to getting you through those moments. It's about paying that emotion the respect it deserves. So for me in the ditch, it was fear. And you take however much time you need and however much time is available to you. And you look at what that emotion is all about and why it's within you and why it's making you feel like it is. For me, it was fear. All I did with that fear, instead of allowing it to be a negative and turning me into a flapping headless chicken, I allowed it to focus my mind on what I needed to do to get myself out of that situation. It's the same with a Monday morning blues feeling. Instead of ignoring that feeling and cracking on with the rest of the day, probably being a little bit miserable to all the people around me, I will sit on the end of my bed and I will take the time to look at myself and wonder why it is that I'm feeling a certain way. Because I'm doing that, I'll eventually work out why I feel that, and then I'll look at a coping strategy or something that I can do to get me out of that situation that I didn't really want to be in. So that for me is essentially my delivery to you. It is all about courage, determination, unselfishness, cheerfulness in the face of adversity. But ultimately, it's about it being emotionally aware and being emotionally aware of the people around you as well. So thanks for listening to me. I hope that was insightful, and I'm more than happy to field some questions as well along with the rest of the panel.
Jason, thank you so much. And I can already see from our questions coming in that we're getting questions. I'm just going to turn the video on for Deborah. I think Farah should be asked to start video. Farah should be up and running. There we have all the panel reconvened. And just again, thank you so much. I can see that there have been questions, particularly one that the last question I can see here, just to tell you, Jason, was about your story about being, when you were so frightened and thinking, I just want my mum, which an anonymous attendee has just said, how can Jason share that story with the NHS? A family member has described the consultants facing C19 as looking like little boys who just need a cuddle from their mums. And I think that fear, whether or not, because obviously doctors are meant to be equipped to deal with medical emergencies, just like you as a trained soldier were meant to be equipped to deal with military emergencies. But whether or not we're trained for these situations or not, we are all facing these extraordinarily frightening situations where most of us just want to cuddle from our mums, don't we?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it is, you've got to allow yourself to be a human. You've got, if you're overcome with those emotions or that feeling, then it's not like you wanted it to happen. You've got to be able to say to yourself, right, okay, I'm obviously in the situation that I find uncomfortable. Acknowledge that, I didn't want to feel like a 10-year-old boy. I was a professional soldier and I was there to do a job. But what I took from that was I needed to allow myself to feel like that, take stock of the situation, allow myself a little bit of a reset, and then remember who you are and take confidence from who you are. A doctor on the front line now, as scary as it must be, and it must be absolutely horrific, you are a trained individual and you've got good training behind you, and you have got a character that will tell you what you need to do. You've just got to allow yourself to be human in that situation. And I think people want to see people being human as well. I think it's a lot more important than seeing someone that's stone cold in the face of adversity and looking like they're a robot. They want to see that there's emotion out there. They don't want to see people that are cold in front of them. And I think that you'll get more from people around you, including the patients, I believe.
Deborah, we had a question from Sophia for you saying, Deborah, how did you combat loneliness when you were out on the ocean? And of course, again, very relevant. A lot of people who are isolating on their own at the moment or trying to combat other people's loneliness. We're all worried about our elderly parents and all the rest of it. Any loneliness tips you picked up on the ocean?
Yeah, I did actually. And I think the biggest one was being prepared to ask for help. I mean, without a doubt, the hardest part of that journey was the loneliness. I think we are designed to communicate. We're designed to give love and receive love. And when you see nobody for month after month, it's just not right. It actually has quite a crippling impact. And I think particularly I found it harder than most would have, because I've got an identical twin sister. So I'd never spent a day alone in my life before. And so the loneliness was really tough. And for the first month, I really tried to kind of dig deep and be like, not whenever I spoke to anyone on the satellite phone, I'd always try and be super positive and, no, I'm doing fine. And then I hit this brick wall because I realized I wasn't going to make it home for Christmas. And I just couldn't bear the thought of being out there alone on Christmas Day when all my family were together. And I kind of spiraled downwards. I just couldn't, I'd sit at the oars for hours crying, not being able to even pull. Like, I think it's really debilitating when you're that lonely. And so I called home and I told them just how bad it had been. And thinking, you know, I'll just vent. And they were like, well, tell us the problem, so we'll find a solution. I'm like, you can't, you're 2,000 miles away. There's no solution to my loneliness. But actually, I think when we're prepared to show our vulnerability, then we can allow our teams, our families to go to absolutely extraordinary lengths to support us. But they can't do that unless they know we're struggling. And so the first thing I said was, right, fine, okay, I want to do Christmas Day. I don't want to be stuck out here on this stupid boat. And they went, that's fine, don't worry, we're going to make Christmas happen for you. And they put a Christmas parcel together in the UK. They flew it to Barbados and they arranged for a yacht to bring it to me, which is the nearest island. And I had everything I'd need for Christmas Day: Santa hat, Christmas decorations, even a little Christmas pudding. The other thing I said, though, was, look, I can't deal with the loneliness anymore. It's absolutely crushed me. And they found a way to link from the diary page on the website to the satellite phone company's website. And the week they set that link up where anyone could send a text message, I had over 1,000 messages and I didn't feel lonely anymore. But it all starts with being able to ask for help. And so at the moment, the way I'm doing that now, I'm stuck in my house, is I have a Corona wine club with my girlfriends. And we have a glass of wine one night a week, at the same time every week. We have a pub quiz on a Saturday night with my extended family. So we've got 5 different families zooming in. So that's been, you know, great fun. And so I think it's finding ways, not just to connect and bemoan, but to ways to connect and have fun.
Keep forgetting to unmute myself. Deborah, thank you so much. Let me look at the questions. I'll just stick with you, Deborah, for this one as well. Amazing story, says Rebecca. Was there ever a time you wanted to give up, or was there no stopping you complete the challenge? And she also asked whether have you written a book she can read about it?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously there were loads of times I felt like giving up. The reality was I could only be rescued by yacht because I was out of helicopter range, and it's very hard to get a rowing boat onto a container ship. So I knew that help was about 2 weeks away. And I guess I was worried that if I got this rescue yacht to divert to me, that within the 2 weeks, maybe I'd change my mind, you know, maybe I'd start loving it again, and that someone else might be really struggling out there and they weren't able to go and help that person because they were coming to me just because I was a bit lonely. So I felt quite a motivation to find a solution. And I guess a pattern started to evolve, which is I noticed that even though I was massively outside my comfort zone, the more I stuck at it on the days where I really felt like giving up, the more it forced me to find a way through it. So it forced me to innovate, and I could cope with that innovation, that finding the new way, if I just focused on controlling the controllables. So what is the next most positive step I could take to get me back on track? And I still do that all the time now. In fact, I came back to England thinking, you know, I'd really never stepped outside my comfort zone in my life before I did the row. I was a PE teacher at the time, but I really wanted to set up businesses like my father had. And so I came back and vowed that I'd push myself outside my comfort zone because I knew it forced me to innovate, and I coped with that because it would help me control. I could do it if I controlled the controllables. And that's been a pattern that has helped me get through so many challenges. But it's coming back to that, getting it down to the absolute root of what is the thing I can control here, because once we've got that, it alleviates some of the stress.
I'm so useless at this. And have you written a book? Was the second bit.
Oh yes, I have. I saw that she'd written that question, so I went and got them. So this is the latest one that's just come out. It's a journal practice that has a lot of the activities in that I listed on what science tells us boosts our positivity. So the Choose Your Attitude journal. There's one called The Journey, which is kind of about the road, but about the mindset side of it. And then this one was just an out and out story. I wrote it when I was really young though. If I'm honest, I think it's a bit rubbish, but you can get it if you want to.
Right, that. I'm sure that most business advisors would say that was not the best pitch for the last book.
I'm not a great salesperson.
Yeah, exactly. This was a bit rubbish. Don't bother to read it. Farah, I'm going to unmute you because there's a question here I want you to give your opinion on. This is from Chelsea, who says, how do you counteract someone on your level that you know brings other people down, or allows them to feel like it's fine for them to shy away from things they may find difficult rather than stand up and face that challenge?
Yeah, and you come across this all the time. I think one of the things to recognize, I mean, look, I've come up against this in my time where you have different types of managers. And I think those managers who go, look, you can step away from it. If you're feeling anxious, don't worry about it. I think people see that as a nurturing style of management. And I think what they see as face your challenges head on, go through them, but go through them with a plan, like Jason was saying. I think they see that as kind of being a real stoic, a kind of stiff upper lip. And I think what happens is then, as you get into this back and forth with them seeing you as a kind of uncaring, your style of management is hard and it's uncaring, and theirs is kind of, nurturing and supportive. So what you have to do is you have to get that person on side, and you have to explain to them that actually, and I do think it is quite a revolutionary concept for some people, because I think a lot of people think this whole concept of facing challenges head on is very much that whole stiff upper lip. And actually it's not that. What I'm saying is that actually the best thing that we can do, particularly for our younger colleagues, is we can walk them through the plan. We can do it together. And by doing that, so it's hugely supportive, we can get them to face obstacles that perhaps they didn't think they were able to do. And through going through those obstacles, they come out the other side and they actually discover huge things about themselves, which I would say as a manager is probably the best thing that you can ever hope to do. I mean, as I said, I've had those situations, and once you explain, I think what it becomes is, originally, I think two managers see they have very different styles, but actually it's the same thing. It's getting people to face challenges, walking them through their obstacles and getting them to the other side is incredibly supportive. It's actually the best thing you can do for them. So I think once you explain that to a peer or even somebody above you, and they start to see it in practice, they start to understand that actually you're in the same place. You're not throwing somebody to the wolves, kind of into the sea without a rubber ring.
Jason, I want to get your opinion on that in just a moment. But before I do, Farah, I just want to pick you were talking about younger employees as well and how to lead. And I just wonder whether the present crisis that we're in and the style of management that's needed to help people navigate it, whether you've noticed any difference between generational differences of how people are reacting to it, what kind of help different people might need.
Actually, interestingly, I mean, obviously my team is relatively young. And actually the interesting thing about this, I think, is there's been a real leveling in that everybody is reacting in the same way, because nobody has been here before. I think that's the thing about this. Kind of older colleagues have never gone through anything like this. So actually I'm seeing it's very much the same. The difference with younger colleagues, in my experience, and I know this from other manager friends of mine, is younger colleagues are in a very difficult situation in terms of their home life is very difficult. So if you are living in a flat share with 5 people and you're on lockdown and there's 5 people doing a Zoom call and you can't get outside, then that exacerbates it. And I suppose that's the thing that makes me fearful, because their living conditions are not made for what's happening right now. Also, the narrative that a lot of them have been taught, which is this coddling away, it's not setting them up for fighting this, I suppose. So I think we're all reacting in the same way. We're scared, is the truth. But I think, particularly my experience of younger colleagues, is their situations. They're not like us, they're not out in the country. It's really, really difficult. And so the best I can do is kind of come up with coping mechanisms for the situation that they find themselves in.
And Jason, because this question was pointed to you as well, that idea of how you counteract somebody who brings people down, and also whether you've got anything to comment on different people having to find different survival techniques depending on their circumstances at the moment.
So the issue I've got with the disruptive person, so to speak, is the fact that I was lucky enough to work in an organisation where everyone is pretty much singing off the same hymn sheet. Everyone's really, really well motivated, well trained. However, that doesn't mean to say that there was never someone that was slightly, slightly disruptive. And I think a lot of that boils down to, like Farah said, is about engaging with that person. So for me, the qualities of a leader means that you've got to manage your team or lead that team, and they're all made up of individuals. That's what makes the team so great. But I think the qualities that the leader requires is obviously trust and loyalty. That goes without saying. I think one of the most important qualities is compassion, and to engage with the people, all of them, including the people that are slightly disruptive, and find out what it is is making them tick like that, and find out how you can sort of like not box around it, but how you can get them to engage better with what you're trying to achieve. So it comes down to being compassionate as far as I'm concerned. You need to be able to engage with every single person there. That's your job. The other question, so quickly remind me. I know what
it was more about different types of people needing different types of survival skills with generational. But also, while I've got the floor, I'm going to throw another one at you, which comes from Emily, which is sort of similar. And she says, what can you do to be more assertive in communicating with others? A lot of people in the corporate world find it hard to say no, or find it hard to say what they really mean. Do you have any tips from the military on how we can all be better at this? And I'm just going to just say, Jason's line is going in and out, so apologies, but I think so far I've managed to catch everything he's saying, but sorry, Jason, just in case you didn't know that you're dipping in and out.
Right.
So how to be more assertive, how to say no if you need to, and any other tips. And just say we've only got 5 minutes or so left.
Okay. Again, the luxury of the military is you have rank and you can say no, and that is gospel. Otherwise, people get into trouble. But that's not what you want to do. That's not the qualities of a good leader, as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of the time, it is actually open to the floor. These plans that I was talking about, everyone is involved in decisions that go into creating that plan. But ultimately, every now and again, you have to remember that you are a leader or someone in that team, and you have to be able to have the courage to stand up and say, no, I disagree with that. And then what you do is you give your reasons for that, for saying no. So it actually makes sense. If you just say no, it gets people's backs up and they become negative with it. Whereas if you say, well, actually, don't necessarily agree with that, and the reasons are because you might be seeing things from a different angle or a different perspective. So it's important that you can communicate by saying no, but you need to do more than that. It's about communicating the reasons why and wherefore.
I did again, didn't I? I decided not to unmute myself. Nobody's going to make a technician out of me. Deborah, I think you wanted to talk about that issue of saying no, but there's also been another question for you saying, Deborah, you mentioned 25% is skill, 75% is attitude. How do you place hard work and luck, as in being in the right place at the right time, within those skill versus attitude percentages?
I don't know where the luck comes in, because the study I read didn't really look into luck, but it did look into hard work. And actually, hard work was one of the attitude traits, along with optimism, enthusiasm, ability to bounce back from adversity. These were all things that they listed under that 75% attitude being more important to job success than, the skill base of things like, being good with numbers or something like that. So I think the hard work does come into it a lot. I don't know about the luck side. I guess that I kind of believe in that old quote about the harder I work, the luckier I am.
Make your own luck. Well, I've got another couple of minutes. I'm going to ask each of you to just sort of, in the style of Jerry Springer, as his final thoughts at the end of the show, any words of wisdom, words of comfort, words of cheerfulness, as Jason might put it, of coping mechanisms that anybody who's watching, or their families or their teammates might find useful at the moment. I will come to Farah, then Jason, then Deborah.
I think one of the things that I will say is, particularly if you are a creative, is that constraint breeds incredible creativity. So actually what you have to see this time as, because you'll be having diminishing resources, diminishing probably people on your teams, what will start to happen is you will unlock real creativity. You'll start to think differently about things, and the results will be very, very different to what you were producing before. And trust me, they will be better. They'll be surprisingly better. So you have to see it, particularly for creatives, as a real opportunity.
Yeah, okay, so mine is probably a little less profound, but for me, I would say live life more like an 18-month-old child, a toddler. That means not forget about your commitments and your diary dates and your Zoom meetings, but don't worry about the past. Live more in the now, as 18-month-old kids do, running around not really caring what's just happened. And don't worry about what hasn't happened, because it hasn't happened. It's a ridiculous way to think. So just live in the now, control the controllables, and give yourself a little bit more time. Take time for yourself.
I think mine would be that it's okay to feel unsettled at the moment. It is all very unsettling, but eventually we've got to take some action. We've got to be proactive about being more positive. We can't expect that our willpower is enough, that I will be positive about the way I handle this. We actually have to find those positivity boosters, the things that work for us, and then habitualize them and structure them. You know, actually, they've got to be timetabled into the day to make sure they happen. And if you've got kids as well, do the same with them, because otherwise they're going to go stir crazy. So give them a routine that allows them to have moments throughout the day that doing activities that boost their positivity. And they might whinge about it at the start, but actually once they've been into it for 5 minutes, they'll be loving it.
Deborah, thank you so much. And also my thanks to Farah and Jason, and to all of you. Thank you so much for sending your questions and your comments. There were lots more, and so apologies I didn't get through them all. Thank you for having me as the last minute stand-in with my very, very bad technical abilities on the mute button. And of course, on behalf of Speakers Corner, please look after yourselves. And don't beat yourselves up if you're not achieving anything, if you're not rowing single-handedly across the ocean, if you're not single-handedly publishing magazines, or if you're not a former Royal Marine SAS Commando. I'm sure you're doing just fine, and I think we'll all deserve a nice glass of wine in about 2 hours' time. But for now, I'm going to log off. Thank you so much, and have a great Easter, everybody.